You've been lied to about chicken breast. Not completely, but enough that it matters. Everything you think you know about building muscle with food is probably half true at best, and the half that's missing might be the only half that actually counts. Scientists at the University of Illinois just published something that should make every gym bro on earth question their meal prep routine. They found that vegan meals can trigger the same muscle growth as meat-based diets when you control for protein quality and timing. The same, not close, the same. So either we've been worshipping at the altar of animal protein for no reason, or something far more interesting is happening beneath the surface of what we call nutrition. The truth is that no single food builds muscle. What builds muscle is the conversation happening between different nutrients inside your body at very specific moments in time, and most people aren't even aware that conversation is taking place. Let me tell you what actually happens when you eat an egg versus when you eat a scoop of isolated protein powder. You might think it's the same because the protein count matches, but your body doesn't read nutrition labels. Your body reads molecular signals. Leucine is one of those signals, and it's probably the most important amino acid you've never heard enough about. Think of leucine as the foreman at a construction site. You can have all the building materials in the world, all the bricks and mortar and steel beams, but without someone to organize the work and tell the crew to start building, nothing gets built. That's leucine. It flips the switch that tells your muscle cells to start synthesizing new protein. Milk happens to be absolutely loaded with leucine. But here's where it gets interesting. Milk contains two different types of protein, whey and casein. Whey hits your bloodstream fast, like a sugar rush but for amino acids. Casein creeps in slowly over hours, like a time-release capsule. Most people think fast is better because we live in a culture that worships speed. But what if slow is actually superior for overnight recovery when you're not eating for 8 hours? What if the mixed protein approach that nature designed in milk is smarter than anything we've engineered in a lab? Some researchers are starting to ask whether strategic timing of mixed protein meals might outperform the high leucine instant hits that bodybuilders have been chugging for decades. Nobody knows for sure yet, but the question alone should make you rethink your relationship with whole foods versus supplements. Now let's talk about what everyone gets wrong about carbohydrates. You've been told that carbs are fuel, which is true the same way saying a car is transportation is true. Technically accurate, but missing the entire point of how the system works. Sweet potatoes and oats and bananas aren't just fuel tanks you fill up before a workout. They're hormonal control panels. When you eat carbohydrates, your pancreas releases insulin, and insulin doesn't just manage blood sugar. Insulin opens the doors on your muscle cells and waves amino acids inside like a bouncer ushering VIPs into a club. Without insulin doing that job, your amino acids are just standing around outside, unable to get in and start the repair work. This is why the timing of your carb intake matters more than almost anyone realizes. The post-workout window that people argue about on Reddit isn't magical because of some mystical metabolic fairy dust. It's simply the moment when your muscle cells are most receptive to the insulin signal and most hungry for the glycogen you just burned through. Bananas in particular have gotten a bad reputation in some circles because they're higher in sugar, but those same people ignore the potassium content. Potassium regulates fluid balance inside your muscle cells, and fluid balance affects how efficiently your muscles contract and recover. When you're depleted in potassium, your performance suffers in ways that are subtle but measurable. The keto crowd will tell you that carbs are completely unnecessary for muscle growth, and they can point to studies showing people who build muscle on ketogenic diets. But when you dig into the data, especially in the context of high-intensity resistance training over long periods, the picture gets murkier. Your body can adapt to almost anything if you give it time, but adaptation and optimization are two different things. Just because you can build muscle without carbs doesn't mean you should. And the question you should be asking is whether you're leaving gains on the table by eliminating an entire class of nutrients that nature seems to think are pretty important. Here's something nobody talks about when they recommend eating a handful of almonds or walnuts every day. Everyone knows nuts are calorie-dense, which makes them useful when you're trying to eat in a surplus to grow. But calories are just one part of a much larger metabolic story. Nuts provide fats that your body uses to manufacture hormones, including testosterone. That matters for muscle growth in ways that are obvious, but there's a darker subplot hiding in the background. Some researchers are starting to wonder if the specific types of fatty acids in nuts, particularly the high levels of polyunsaturated fats, might actually tilt your hormonal balance in unfavorable directions, depending on your individual biology. There's an emerging debate about whether certain PUFAs could modulate cortisol levels, and cortisol is the hormone that breaks down muscle tissue when you're stressed or not recovering properly. This is one of those areas where the science is still wrestling with itself, where experts look at the same data and draw opposite conclusions. Some say nuts are hormonally beneficial. Others say they could be sabotaging your testosterone in subtle ways that take years to manifest. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and probably depends on how much you're eating and what the rest of your diet looks like. But the point is that when you eat nuts, you're not just adding calories. You're injecting a hormonal variable into your system, and that variable interacts with everything else you're eating in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let me ask you something that sounds simple but isn't. Is it better to eat 3 big meals a day or 6 small meals spread out evenly? The bodybuilding world has been arguing about this for decades, and the answer keeps changing depending on which study came out last month. But maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about frequency at all. Maybe it's about amino acid availability viewed through the lens of time. Your muscles are constantly breaking down and rebuilding protein every minute of every day, even when you're sitting still reading this. When you flood your system with protein all at once in a big meal, you get a spike in muscle protein synthesis that lasts a few hours and then drops off. When you spread smaller doses throughout the day, you get smaller spikes that last longer in total. The Illinois researchers who found that vegan and meat diets performed equally well also noted that meal timing was a critical variable, not just the source of the protein. Some lifters are experimenting with cyclic ingestion patterns timed to their training intensity, eating more frequently on heavy training days and less frequently on rest days. Does it work better than just hitting your macros and calling it a day? Maybe. Maybe not. But for experienced lifters who've already optimized the obvious variables, meal patterning might be one of the last frontiers where meaningful gains are hiding. The human body doesn't operate on a 24-hour clock when it comes to muscle growth. It operates on a series of overlapping signals that peak and trough based on what you ate, when you ate it, and what you did physically in between meals. If you're still thinking about nutrition as a daily total instead of a temporal pattern, you're playing checkers while your body is playing 3-dimensional chess. Now we need to talk about something uncomfortable. You should always be suspicious when research tells you exactly what you want to hear. And you should be even more suspicious when that research was paid for by someone with a financial interest in the conclusion. The beef industry has funded studies on animal versus plant proteins, which makes sense because they want to sell beef. But here's what's weird. Some of those studies actually favored plant protein constructs. That's not what you'd expect if the whole thing was rigged, right? Unless the rigging is more sophisticated than we think. Maybe the goal isn't to make meat look good, but to make the entire debate look more legitimate by occasionally funding research that goes against their interests. Or maybe, and this is the boring answer that's probably correct, the science is just messy and complicated and doesn't care about our narratives. Plant proteins get labeled as ultra-processed and therefore bad, but the classification systems we use like NOVA were designed to categorize foods based on industrial processing, not nutritional outcomes. A protein isolate made from peas might be heavily processed, but that doesn't automatically make it inferior for muscle growth if the amino acid profile is right and the bioavailability is high. Meanwhile, there's a massive blind spot in almost all nutrition research that nobody wants to talk about. We don't really understand digestive kinetics at the individual level, and we definitely don't understand how the microbiome affects nutrient absorption and anabolic responsiveness. Your gut contains trillions of bacteria that are actively breaking down and modifying everything you eat before it even reaches your bloodstream. Different people have different bacterial populations, which means the same meal could produce different nutritional outcomes in different bodies. This is why some people swear by certain foods and other people see no benefit from those same foods. It's not placebo. It's not genetics in the traditional sense. It's the invisible ecosystem living inside you that we're only just starting to map. So where does all of this leave us? What should you actually eat if you want to build muscle in 2025 and beyond? The future of muscle nutrition isn't going to be found in the next superfood or the next magical supplement. It's going to be found in precision nutrition guided by artificial intelligence that can analyze your specific biology and tell you not just what to eat, but when to eat it, based on your training schedule, your sleep patterns, your stress levels, and probably your gut microbiome composition. We're already seeing the early versions of this technology, apps that track everything and spit out personalized recommendations. But the real breakthrough will come when we can measure anabolic signaling in real time and adjust meal composition on the fly. Some researchers are hypothesizing that combining specific amino acid profiles from whole food meals, things like eggs plus oats plus milk eaten together, might create synergistic effects on anabolic signaling that you can't get from isolated nutrients. The interaction between different proteins and carbohydrates and fats eaten simultaneously could trigger cascades of molecular events that are greater than the sum of their parts. Nobody has proven this yet, but the hypothesis is sitting there waiting to be tested. What we do know is that your body is not a simple input-output machine. It's a staggeringly complex biological system that responds to food in context-dependent ways that vary based on timing, combination, and individual physiology. The chicken breast and rice and broccoli that worked for someone else might not work optimally for you, and the vegan meal that works for you might fail for your training partner. The future of gaining muscle isn't about finding the one true diet. It's about finding your diet, the specific pattern of foods and timing and quantities that your unique biology responds to best. And the most exciting part is that we're just now developing the tools to figure out what that pattern actually is.